Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're going with my final thoughts for week 3 of the NFL season over on Draftkings, and I'll have my lineup building video posted tomorrow afternoon because you guys seem to like that for the most part, so I will be doing that again. And I'll have my core plays video posted on Sunday morning for you guys, so be on the lookout for those. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit the subscribe button. And we're all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players, and I cover other sports as well, including NASCAR and the MLB. So if you're going to come back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit the subscribe button and turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me on social media, my handle's in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you want to support more content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. I get over 300 members there. You can hop into the Discord chat, ask me questions, ask the members questions, or just come in and hang out. It's always a good time in Discord. And you get access into my entire NFL DFS data sheet, which has pretty much every statistic you want heading into the weekend. Wide receiver versus quarterback matchups, the Vegas totals, the pace of play, the season statistics, the matchup total, the matchup numbers. And I got a cheat sheet in there with my notes and a bunch of other stuff as well, and everything is all color coordinated, so it's pretty easy to read what's good, what is bad. So if you're interested, links down below. If not, hey, that's fine. Let's just dive into this weekend's slate. So as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and I'm one that likes to spend down at quarterback a bit, especially in cash games, but I think I'm going to flip away from that strategy this weekend because all the quarterbacks I like for the most part are pretty expensive. Yeah, Carson Wentz and Mitch Trubisky, they're both cheap and in pretty good spots, but I think in cash games, I'm going to either stick with Wilson, Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, and Cam Newton. And as of right now, Kyler Murray is my front runner because he's my favorite quarterback on the slate here. Love the spot for Kyler, and I love the Cardinals' offense in general to end this weekend. So I have plenty of interest in him. But I mean, both Wilson, Prescott, Murray, and Cam Newton are all in great spots here, and you really can't go wrong with either one of them. So I'll start out top here with Russell Wilson at 7,300, and he has been absolutely fantastic this season. This is definitely going to be a game we want to target for DFS purposes. We have a massive, and I mean massive, 57-point over-under. I think earlier on in the week it was at 55 or 55.5, and I thought that was pretty good. Now we're all the way up to 57, and the Seahawks have a 31 implied team total. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of fantasy points scored in this game, and I definitely going to want exposure to it. I mean, game stacks are obviously going to be viable. Is it going to be chalky? Sure, but I definitely like both offenses here, and it should be a pretty darn good game for fantasy purposes. If you're looking at Russ's numbers this season, he's got 9 passing touchdowns, 4.5 touchdowns per game, over 300 passing yards per game, 82% completion percentage, 10 yards per attempt. Not really doing too much in the run game. He does have 34 rushing yards per game, but 140 QB rating. And the matchup versus Dallas, they're 18th DVA versus the pass, only allowing 20 Draftkings points per game to quarterbacks, but 275 passing yards per game and 2 passing touchdowns. He should be totally fine here. He's got good options, and it's also very easy to stack this game up because the receiving options on both sides are pretty cheap. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf are not that expensive. And then on the flip side, you have Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb that aren't that expensive either. So even though both quarterbacks are pretty expensive, the options to stack them with are really not that expensive. So it kind of makes up for it for the most part. But yeah, you're definitely going to want exposure to this game. And I mean, both plays are just fantastic. Russell Wilson, he's just been so good this season. I think he's honestly super viable in this game. Then on the flip side, we have Dak Prescott, 7,200. He comes in at the 5-point underdog on the road here. So I would assume Dallas is going to have more of a pass-heavy game script, but even then, Zeke should be totally fine. Only a 5-point spread really isn't anything too crazy, and we have a 57-point over-under, and Dak Prescott's got some elite weapons to throw the ball to. You got Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, and even have Zeke out of the backfield, who's been a capable pass catcher this season. And Dak, he's having a great 2 games so far, 358 passing yards per game, 43 pass attempts per game. He also stole a bunch of rushing touchdowns last week from Zeke. So if you guys own Zeke, I'm sure you were not happy with Dak Prescott if you didn't happen to have Prescott, because I feel like he stole every single goal line touchdown besides one last weekend. And Zeke would have been absolutely smashed city. But, I mean, I definitely got all the Cowboys here. And they're also playing very fast this season. They have the fastest pace of play at 20 seconds per play so far. Seahawks, not so much. They've been one of the slower teams, but this game should be pretty high scoring back and forth, and I think Dak Prescott should have a pretty strong game here in Seattle. They've really struggled versus the pass this season. They're 29th DVA versus that, 23.9 Draftkings points per game given up, nearly 400 passing yards per game, and 3.5 passing touchdowns allowed per game as well. So Dak Prescott should be in line for a pretty strong game here, and he's someone I certainly have a lot of interest in. But my favorite quarterback play of the week is going to be Kyler Murray at 6,800. If you think that 57-point over-under is pretty good, I mean, the Cardinals are right at a 55.5, which is not that far off. And they also have a team total of 30.5 here and a 5.5. They're also 5.5-point favorites at home. And Kyler Murray, he's having a fantastic season. He's kind of been like Lamar Jackson like last year because he's running the ball quite a bit. We're getting 12 rushing attempts a game for Kyler Murray so far at nearly 80 rushing yards per game, 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game. He's also throwing the ball quite a bit too, 39 passing attempts per game, and he's got good options for the ball too. He's got one of the best wide receivers in football in DeAndre Hopkins, although Christian Kirk looks like he's going to end up missing this game, but I think all he needs is Hopkins for the most part, and this is a very beatable matchup here versus Detroit. And that rushing upside is definitely going to make him super interesting here. This is also a team that likes to play fast as well. So definitely Kyler Murray. The matchup versus the Lions are 24th DVA versus the pass, 24.1 DraftKings points per game given up to quarterbacks, and nearly 300 passing yards per game allowed as well. So Kyler Murray, he's my QB1 on the slate. I think he's in a fantastic spot, and that rushing upside makes him just a super safe option with a ton of upside as well. So you can sign me up for Kyler Murray. I think he's your cash game quarterback this week, once again like he was last week. I think last week he was 6,100. He was about, 60-some% owned in cash games. I could see that number being a little bit lower this week because he's $700 more, but I think he's just in a fantastic spot. And Kyler Murray looks like he's going to be one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in the league so far this season. So I think we'll probably see him ending up being over 7K here soon enough with Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson. But love Kyler Murray this weekend. I know he's a little bit more expensive, but he should be totally fine. Then Cam Newton, 6,700. I know there was questions if he was going to run the ball quite a bit in New England, and he has certainly squashed that because he is running the ball a ton. He's pretty much the entire offense for the most part. He's getting 11.5 rushing attempts per game, 2 rushing touchdowns per game, 61 rushing yards per game. He's also throwing the ball pretty well too, 275 passing yards per game, only half a passing touchdown, but it's that rushing upside that's going to get me interested. Now, I prefer Kyler Murray straight up over Cam Newton here, but I still think Cam's in a pretty good spot here versus Las Vegas. They're 26th DVA versus the pass this season, allowing around 20 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks and nearly 300 passing yards per game. They also have a pretty big offensive line versus defensive line pass blocking advantage, according to PFF this week. So Cam Newton, I think he's a fine pivot in tournaments off of Kyler Murray, but they're pretty similar plays, but overall I would prefer Kyler Murray because of that insane team total that they have at 30.5 and a nice 55.5 point over-under as well. But both options are fine, and all 4 of these quarterbacks that I mentioned do have some rushing upside, although Kyler Murray and Cam Newton obviously have by far the most rushing upside of those 4 quarterbacks. And then if you want to get a little bit cheap, Carson Wentz at 5,800. So the offensive line is still going to be a problem. They got Lane Johnson back, which is obviously going to be a boost, but it's still a bit of an issue, and they are allowing some pressure. But this matchup versus Cincy is kind of a get-right spot for the most part versus the Bengals, who just had a pretty awful defense so far this season. They made Baker Mayfield look pretty good on Thursday night. And then on the week 1, they faced Tyrod Taylor, which doesn't really count. So we're not going to look too much into the week 1 stats, but this should be a pretty beatable defense here. And Carson Wentz, I think he's fine for the price tag. I don't feel that great about it because he hasn't been that great so far this season. But he is throwing the ball quite a bit. 42.5 pass attempts per game, 256 passing yards per game. Pretty gross, 2 picks per game and only 1 passing touchdown per game. But I like the spot versus Cincy. They are 16th DVA versus the pass. Keep in mind they did play Tyrod Taylor-led Chargers team, so it's going to be a little bit iffy, a little bit skewed there. Only 12.7 DraftKings points per game allowed to quarterbacks. But they did struggle versus Baker Mayfield and company, and this is a pretty beatable matchup. So I don't mind Carson Wentz for the money. But in cash games, I would really try to get Cam Newton or above because I don't really feel that comfortable with Carson Wentz in cash games. He feels like more of a tournament option. Then Mitch Trubisky, 5,700. Another guy I don't feel too comfortable with. He's only getting 216 passing yards per game so far. 2 net passing touchdowns, which isn't too bad. He's been over 15 DraftKings points in his first 2 outings. But I like the spot versus Atlanta. Atlanta has given up the QB1 each and every single week so far, so you can't really get much better than that. But you do have to keep in mind they have played Russell Wilson and Dak Prescott, 2 of some of the best quarterbacks in the league. So yeah, it could be skewed a little bit, but still they're giving up 40 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, 28 DVA versus the pass, nearly 400 passing yards per game, no interceptions yet, 2.5 passing touchdowns per game, and also 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game. But keep in mind they did play Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson, so again, those numbers are going to be skewed. But Trubisky, he's cheap. This is a great matchup. He's got Allen Robinson to throw the ball to, so I think he's fine just for cheap. But again, guys, if you're playing cash games, I think Cam Newton, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson is probably where you should land, and I would have a lean on Kyler Murray because I do think he's the best QB play on this slate. And we'll move on to the RB position. We'll start off here with Zeke Elliott at 8,300. So he's pretty much going to be one of the safest running backs to roster each and every single week. The volume's going to be there. He's involved in the passing game. He's going to get you around 30 touches, and this is a pretty good offense. Now, I prefer the passing game in this game. I don't really think Zeke is an absolute necessity. Is he a fine cash game option? For sure, but I think most people in cash games are going to be around that Taylor, Sanders, and Drake range, which I totally get, so we can spend it at quarterback a bit and a wide receiver for someone like DeAndre Hopkins. So I don't think Zeke is an absolute necessity, but obviously he's a fantastic play. There's a 57-point over-under. He could have had like 3 or 4 touchdowns last week if Dak Prescott didn't steal every single goal line touchdown, it seems like. They play very fast, the fastest pace of play in the league so far. and he's getting 22 rushing attempts per game, 92 rushing yards, 5.5 targets per game, which is pretty nice, getting close to around 30 touches per game. And Ezekiel Elliott is obviously a very talented running back, and this is one of the best offenses in football. So yeah, I'm going to have some interest in Zeke here, although the Seattle Seahawks are pretty tough versus the run so far. Only 50 DVOA versus the run, or only, but I mean, in a good way. 50 DVOA versus the run, only allowing 19.6 DraftKings points per game to running backs and 46 rushing yards per game. This is also a pretty big run blocking disadvantage for the Cowboys, according to PFF this week, with a minus 47% offensive line versus defensive line run blocking advantage. So I don't think Zeke is an absolute must play. Do I think he's probably going to get you 20 plus points? Sure, but I think guys like Jonathan Taylor, Miles Sanders, and even Kenyan Drake can do the same exact numbers as Ezekiel Elliott this week for a lot cheaper as well. So he's fine, but just not an absolute lock. Derrick Henry, 7,800. This is a pretty good post-hype play. Last week he was an absolute chalk, and he dudded. I mean, he still had nearly 90 rushing yards, but he didn't get into the end zone. And the way he was priced, which was similar to this week, you were kind of hoping for a lot more. I know I was. He was a core play for me on formats. Just unfortunately did not end up working out. But I think this is a good post-hype play. I don't think a lot of people are going to go with Derrick Henry. I still think he's going to be decently owned, but he's not going to be owned nearly as much as he was last week. And this is still a pretty good spot versus Minnesota. They have struggled mightily defensively so far this season. And Derrick Henry, we know he's going to get around 30 touches in this game. And they are 2.5-point favorites as well, which is a good game script for Derrick Henry. I know it's not a huge favorite, but they're still favorites nonetheless. And if they are leading, they're going to want to pound the ball with Derrick Henry if it's working, and typically it does work. This season, he's averaging 28 rushing attempts per game with 100 rushing yards per game and 2 targets per game. So we should get around 30 opportunities here for Derrick Henry, and I think he should very well be able to get over 100 rushing yards in this game and more than likely find the end zone. He's yet to find the end zone yet this season, but Derrick Henry is a guy that can score touchdowns in a hurry. So I think, one of these days he's going to right the ship here. In Minnesota, they're 23rd DVOA versus the run so far, allowing over 30 DraftKings points per game to running backs, over 100 rushing yards per game, and a rushing touchdown per game. Also, a pretty big run blocking advantage matchup here for the Tennessee Titans per PFF. So, Derrick Henry, I think he's a pretty good post-hype place, but I think he's a pretty strong option in tournaments. But I'm not really sure I'm going to get there in cash games because I like some of these cheaper backs a little bit better. But I think he's fine in tournaments just like Zeke is. Then Jonathan Taylor, 7,000. So, I really, really like this Jonathan Taylor, Miles Sanders, and Kenyan Drake range. I think this is where you're going to end up in cash games for the most part because these guys are going to get around 20 touches, if not more, and they're also viable in the pass game as well. So they're not just one-dimensional, and they also have 3 really good matchups too. So I think that's where most people are going to land in cash games. If you can fit all 3 in, I think that's probably the best way to go. Now, let's start with Jonathan Taylor here. He comes in at 7,000. Good matchup here versus the Jets, who have just looked horrendous this season. And this is a really good game script for Jonathan Taylor here. They're 11.5-point favorites at home on your 28 implied team total. Now, I do worry a bit of them blowing them out because we saw Jordan Wilkins get most of the carries at the end of the game last week, and then they were killing the Vikings, so that could be a little bit of an issue here, but I still think Jonathan Taylor should have a pretty good game. He had well over 20 touches, and honestly, he has 30 touch upside, and he's going to be involved in the passing game as well. You get those Phillip Rivers dump-offs. So Jonathan Taylor, I think he's in an awesome spot here. Not the Vikings, I apologize, the Jets. They have been pretty strong versus the run this season. They are 3rd DVOA, but this Colts offensive line is pretty awesome, and I don't think they're going to have an issue here with the Jets' defensive line. They allowed Raheem Mostert to bust off an 80-yard touchdown to start the game, and they were fine. I think Jonathan Taylor is in a pretty good spot here, and they have a huge run-blocking advantage matchup here, according to PFF, a 72% advantage, and they're allowing 169 rushing yards per game to running backs. So even though they're 30 versus the run, I think Jonathan Taylor should be in a really good spot here, and I think he's a fantastic play. And I know he's $1,300 more expensive than he was last week, but I told you guys the price is only going to go up, and I still think he's viable with $7,000. We're probably going to see him around $8,000 when this season ends because this is a great offensive line. Jonathan Taylor's a very talented running back, and he's going to get us 20-plus touches pretty much each and every single week. So love Jonathan Taylor. Miles Sanders is 6,400. He's probably going to end up being our highest-owned player on the entire slate, let alone running back. But this is a really good spot versus Cincinnati, who just got brutalized by Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb last week. And Miles looked awesome in his first game of the season. Remember, he missed week 1, but in week 2, he was great. He had 95 rushing yards, 20 rushing attempts, found the end zone, 4.8 yards per carry. And the thing I like the most here is the 7 targets that he had. That's excellent. He only caught 3 of them, but still. He had an 8% target share, which is, it's whatever, 15% weighted opportunity share, 36 receiving yards. But look, he's going to get us around 20 to 30 touches here, and this is a great spot versus Cincy. They're allowing nearly 200 rushing yards per game to running backs. Again, a little bit skewed from what, not Derrick Henry, of a Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb just did, but still 2 rushing touchdowns per game, 25th DVOA versus the position, and they struggled versus the run last season as well. So Miles Sanders is in a really good spot, and he's going to be your highest-owned player on the slate, and he's someone you're just going to want to lock in for cash games. If you want to pivot in tournaments, whatever, but just plug him in cash games and just eat the chalk, because I think this is pretty good chalk here. And they're also 4.5 point favorites at home. And I think a good correlation would probably play the Eagles defense. That's only 2,800 this week. Then Kenyan Drake at 6,000. He has yet to really have a big boom game, but I think it could be coming here versus Detroit. They are getting killed by running backs so far. And we have a 55.5 point over-under in this game, a 30.5 implied team total, which is second only to the Seahawks this week. And they're 5.5 point favorites at home. And we know Kenyan Drake's going to get around 20 touches in this game. He's a capable pass catcher. He's only getting 2 targets per game this season with a 5% target share, but look, he's going to be fine at 6,000. 18 rushing attempts per game, only 73 rushing yards. But look, Detroit's a team that sucks versus the run so far. I mean, this season they're dead last, 32nd DVA versus the run, allowing nearly 40 DraftKings points per game to the position, nearly 200 rushing yards per game to the position. They're also giving up quite a bit in the pass game as well. So I think Kenyan Drake's in a great spot. And we just saw what Aaron Jones did to this team last weekend. So definitely like Kenyan Drake. And I really don't think it's that bad of a correlation to play Kenyan Drake with Kyler Murray and even DeAndre Hopkins this week, because there's going to be a lot of points scored, and like Kenyan Drake's just a little bit underpriced here. So definitely like all three quite a bit. Now we'll talk about Hopkins when we get to the wide receiver position. Then my last running back, so I could have put Mike Davis here, I could have put Jerick McKinnon. I decided to go with Jeff Wilson at 4,000 just because it sounds like he's going to lead the backfield in touches for the 49ers and not Jerick McKinnon. Could McKinnon be pretty efficient, get some passing game work? Sure, but I'm going to side with the guy that I think is going to get the most touches here. He's only $4,000. And we've seen Wilson have some decent games in the past. And he's not the worst running back in the world. Not saying he's that great, but it's mostly just the system here. Usually running backs in Kyle Shanahan's system tend to do pretty well. And at only $4,000, if he's going to give me double-digit touches, I will take it versus the Giants, who just don't have that great of a defense. Now, so far this season, they are 6th DVA versus the run. But last year, their numbers were pretty awful versus the run. It's only a 2-game sample size so far. And the 49ers are 4-point favorites here, so I think Jeff Wilson at only $4,000 should be fine. Should be able to get you. I think he could crack double-digit points. I don't think you really have to go there in cash games. I think in cash games, you stick with the guys you know are going to get guaranteed volume, like Drake, Sanders, Taylor, Henry, and Zeke. But I think Wilson is an interesting tournament play. Now we'll move on to the wide receiver position. And up top, we have DeAndre Hopkins at 7,900, which almost feels like a lock play in cash games. He is pretty expensive, so I understand if you can't get up there, but he's an excellent pairing with Kyler Murray, and he's just been getting all the targets this season. And Christian Kirk looks like he's going to end up missing this game, which I know he hasn't really been getting peppered with targets for the most part, but it still just makes DeAndre Hopkins the clear number 1 wide receiver here, which he already was, but he's going to be like really the only viable passing option besides, I almost said Logan Thomas, which I don't know why, but I meant Andy Isabella. I don't understand why I got those confused. But anyway, DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to soak up all the targets here, and he's having a fantastic start to this season. If we're just looking at his overall numbers, 12.5 targets per game, 11 catches per game, over 100 receiving yards per game, a 35% target share, 73% weighted opportunity share. Not really getting the ball down the field, only an 8 out of 5.6, but again, he should be able to get double-digit targets, and this is a good spot versus Detroit. He should be matched up against Jeff Okudah for the most part this game, and if you were looking at the PFF numbers, he got graded absolutely horrendous. Now, I don't specifically rely on PFF grading, but overall, his numbers were bad. He had like a 29 quarterback rating, which was horrendous in his first start. Again, only his first start of his career. He was a first-round pick, so I don't think he's going to be that bad. But, I mean, still, he's learning, and he's going to be going up against one of the best wide receivers in football. It's pretty much unguardable. So, to him, I say good luck, because I just don't really think it's going to work out. I think he gave up around 3.5 fantasy points per route covered, I'm pretty sure, and over 100 receiving yards. So, DeAndre Hopkins should be able to eat here no matter who he's matched up against. I'm not sure if he's going to shadow him. We will see, but Hopkins should be able to smash. And if you're looking at how Detroit's done versus the wide receiver position so far this season, 24th DVOA, 40 DraftKings points allowed per game, and nearly 200 receiving yards and a receiving touchdown. So Hopkins, he'll probably get 100-plus yards and a touchdown in this game. 30.5 applied team totals. Points are going to be coming from somewhere. Kyler Murray, Kenyan Drake, DeAndre Hopkins. It's probably going to be pretty concentrated on those 3 guys. Then going down to Adam Thielen at 6,900. I wouldn't say I love Thielen, but I do like that he pretty much gets all the targets in this offense. Now, Kirk Cousins was horrendous last week, but still Thielen's got a 33% target share, an 87% weighted opportunity share, 274 air yards, which is a little surprising for someone like Adam Thielen, 17.1 ADOT, 87% weighted opportunity share, so I think he's fine. 8 targets per game, only 4.5 catches. But I think this is a good spot. Minnesota's actually playing pretty fast as well with 22 seconds per play ran. And the matchup versus the Titans, they are 10th DVA versus the pass this season, only allowing 35 DraftKings points per game, but nearly 200 receiving yards, and Adam Thielen's pretty much the only option here for the most part. So I think he's fine at 6,900. If you can't get all the way up to DeAndre Hopkins, I think Thielen, a guy that's probably going to get around 10 targets in this game, should be a viable secondary option. And then after Thielen, I guess I'm going to keep it simple here, but it's just mainly getting exposure to this game. Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett. This game's got a 57-point over-under. And obviously, we're going to want exposure to each and every single one of these guys. Amari Cooper, he's going to be the high volume of these three guys. He's getting 11 targets per game with a 27% target share, 233 air yards, 10.1 ADOT, and 90 receiving yards per game. He's the same price as DK Metcalf and only $100 more than Tyler Lockett. He's probably the safest option, but DK Metcalf's got that big boom upside where he can take a post or just a fade all the way down the field and score a touchdown. He's done that twice now so far this season. Then Tyler Lockett's more the safer option compared to DK Metcalf. He's got similar upside, but he doesn't have that like huge play upside that DK Metcalf does. I mean, not to say Tyler Lockett's not I don't know, they're kind of similar players, but DK Metcalf's obviously a physical freak. I mean, the guy's just amazing athletically. And I would say he's better at stretching defenses, but they're both going to get similar targets here. Although I feel like Tyler Lockett's just overall a bit safer. He gets more of the underneath stuff because DK Metcalf's ADOT's at 14.9 compared to 9.1 for Tyler Lockett. But 8 targets per game, Metcalf's at only 6.5, and Tyler Lockett's catching almost everything he's getting thrown to. So I think both are fine options here. If you're looking for a little bit more upside, I like DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett is just a bit safer for $100 cheaper, but I like pretty much every single person in this game. Seattle, if you're looking at their numbers versus wide receivers this season for Amari Cooper, they're getting crushed. 365 receiving yards per game allowed to wide receivers. 73.5 Draftkings points per game to wide receivers as well. And 29th DVA versus the pass. So you can sign me up for all the Cowboys wide receivers. Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and even Michael Gallup. I like CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper the most. And actually, just point per dollar wise, I would say CeeDee Lamb over Amari Cooper. Because CeeDee Lamb looks awesome this season. But you can't go wrong with any of the wide receivers in this game. So I'm not going to really go too in-depth there. But Metcalf, Cooper, Lockett, CeeDee Lamb, all fantastic options. Now, Allen Robinson is 6,200. If you're using Mitch Trubisky, obviously you're going to want to pair him up with Allen Robinson. But if it's just as a standalone play, I think Robinson is going to be fine. He's going to get peppered with targets. Now, most of the targets he's gotten this season have not been catchable. I think only like 40% of the balls he's been throwing, according to PFF, have been catchable so far this season, which is horrendous. But the guy's obviously a very talented wide receiver, and this is a good matchup here versus Atlanta. So far in the season, 8.5 targets per game, 234 air yards, 42% market share of the team's air yards. But only 4 catches a game and 53 receiving yards. But these numbers should be going up. And the matchup versus Atlanta, they're 28th DVA versus the pass so far, allowing about 50 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers and 262 receiving yards per game. So Robinson, I like the price point. Again, if you can't get up to guys like DeAndre Hopkins, Allen Robinson, Tyler Lockett, Cooper, Deontay Johnson, these guys are all fine secondary options if you want to spend up a bit more at running back and quarterback. And then going down to Deontay Johnson at 5,400, he's getting a ton of targets from Ben Roethlisberger, and this is a pretty good matchup here versus Houston. And while I expect Juju Smith-Schuster to play, he's still questionable heading into the game, and he hasn't really been practicing much. So if he happened to be out, Deontay Johnson is going to be a very, very good play. But even with him being in, he's been a fine play. He's gotten 10.5 targets per game so far this season, 7.5 catches, 10.5 targets per game, 7 catches per game, and 74 receiving yards per game. A 31.94% target share. Not really getting the ball down the field much with an ADOT of 6.3. But he's just getting the ball quite a bit. This is a very beatable Houston secondary. If you're looking at their numbers this season, they're 23rd DVA versus the pass. 31.8 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers. And Deontay Johnson, he's a talented wide receiver. So he should probably get around double-digit targets once again. And you can sign me up for Deontay Johnson at 5,400. I wouldn't say I'm in love with this game overall, but I do like Deontay Johnson individually. Then CeeDee Lamb, 5,400. I already kind of mentioned all the wide receivers in this game. They're all viable options. But I do like CeeDee Lamb the best, I would say, just because he's the cheapest at 5,400. He should probably be right around where Tyler Lockett, Metcalf, and Amari Cooper is, just because he's been getting 7.5 targets per game so far, 5.5 catches, 82 receiving yards. Now, 17% target share compared to Amari Cooper's 27%, but still, he should at least be closer to Amari Cooper. Probably shouldn't be the same price, but he should probably be in that 6K range. And again, I want exposure to this game. The Cowboys look like they're going to be playing from behind here, some being 5-point underdogs on the road. So yeah, CeeDee Lamb should probably be in for a pretty strong game here, and it is a good matchup versus Seattle, so definitely like CeeDee Lamb. Deshaun Jackson, 5,200. This is the guy I added on my player pool as well, just because Jalen Reagor is going to miss this game and actually quite some time. So Deshaun Jackson is going to be the de facto wide receiver 1 as long as Alshon Jeffrey is not playing. I know he returned to practice to get a limited session in, but I still feel like he's going to miss this game. And if he does, Deshaun Jackson, I think he's in an excellent spot. Even if Alshon Jeffrey does play, I think we can still use Jackson, but still like D-Jax here. He's getting a lot of air yards this season. I believe he's 3rd in air yards, 282 air yards, ADOT of 17.6. Going to get the ball down the field here, and this is a very beatable secondary versus Cincinnati. We saw Odell beat him deep a couple of times. Now, it could have been 2 times if they didn't hold Odell massively in the one play where it didn't even get called. But Djax, he's got the burners, and I think he's going to be a pretty solid play here. 7.5 targets per game so far, only 4 catches, 55 receiving yards. But there's plenty of upside here. He's got a 6% market share of the team's air yards. And again, no Jalen Reagor. So Deshaun Jackson, I think he's actually a very strong play at 5,200 versus a very beatable Cincinnati secondary. And Ezekiel Elliott at 4,200. He's questionable, but I'm assuming he's going to end up playing here. This is a beatable matchup versus the Raiders. He's not having a bad season. I think he's just a bit too cheap here. 8.5 targets per game so far, a 29% target share, 6.5 catches per game, and only 55 receiving yards. But I think he'll be fine. He's just too cheap and not really getting the ball down the field much. Only 99 air yards on the season and 5.5 ADOT. But I mean, it's a beatable matchup versus the Raiders. They're 60 VA versus the pass, allowing 32.5 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers. And he's just a bit too cheap here, and you can easily pair him up with Cam Newton if you feel like you want to, although you can certainly play Cam Newton naked. You don't really have to pair anybody with him. Then KJ Hamler, 3,000. I'm not really sure if he's sneaky. I've seen quite a few people talking him up, but he is the bare minimum, and at 3,000, I think he's somewhat interesting. There's no Courtland Sutton, and last week he did see 7 targets. He did not play week 1, but he had 7 targets, caught 3 of them for only 48 yards, but he had an 8 out of 16.6 and 116 air yards. Now, Jeff Driscoll is going to be his quarterback, and that kind of sucks. Not saying Drew Luck's the best quarterback in the world, but Drew Luck's definitely an upgrade over Jeff Driscoll. But again, this guy is only $3,000. The matchup versus Tampa Bay is not great. They have a pretty strong defense in all aspects. They're good versus the pass and good versus the run, and 68 versus the pass. But look, at $3,000, you do not need much at all. And if you want to go with big spending up for DeAndre Hopkins, Zeke, Henry, Kyler Murray, the slate, you're going to need some value somewhere, and KJ Hamler at 3,000 is one of the better value plays on this slate. Now, he's by no means a lock just to crush in cash games and whatnot, but at $3,000, it can open up your lineup in tournaments for sure. I'd be a little bit iffy going there in cash games, but he's certainly tournament viable to spend up for your stacks. So I don't mind KJ Hamler there. Then we move on to the tight end position. And we'll start up here with Darren Waller at 5,700. Now, he and Josh Jacobs have not yet practiced this week, but I'm assuming it's just rest, and they did play on Monday night, so I guess they're going to be a little bit behind schedule. I'm assuming Darren Waller is going to play here. I don't see why he wouldn't, but $5,700, he is going to get a ton of targets here. Last week, he was just absolutely peppered with targets. I think he had, 14 or 16 targets, and he got 12 or 14 balls. I can't remember exactly what the number was. But so far this year, he's gotten 11.5 targets per game, a near 40% target share, 135 air yards, a 32% market share of the team's air yards, 74 receiving yards per game, and 9 receptions per game as well. Now, the matchup versus New England, I wouldn't say it's something I like. They're only allowing 4 DraftKings points per game to the tight end position, but it's only a 2-game sample size, and Darren Waller is the best tight end they're going to face yet, so I think he'll be totally fine there. And the volume is going to be super safe. So I do like Darren Waller. Jonnu Smith, 5,200. Doesn't sound like A.J. Brown's going to play once again, meaning a big boost for Jonnu Smith. We saw that last week. Now, I can't expect him to score 2 touchdowns again, but he's going to be involved in the offense. And this has a 49.5 point over-under. So points are going to be scored in this game. They also have a 26 implied team total. But 6 targets per game so far, 4 catches, 1.5 receiving touchdowns per game. He's got, 3 in the season, and 60 receiving yards. Not really getting the ball down the field too much. But Jonnu Smith, I think he's fine, but I would say I don't like the price tag that much. I think I'd rather play Zach Ertz or Dallas Goedert. They got a really good matchup here versus Cincy. I got some interest in Carson Wentz, and I have interest in the Eagles overall. So yeah, I'm going to like Zach Ertz and Dallas Goedert here. Pretty much putting up the similar numbers in terms of targets. Ertz is seeing 7 targets per game so far. Dallas Goedert at 8 targets. Goddard's doing a little bit better so far this season. He's actually got more of a target share, but I mean, both are fine options here. You're kind of splitting hairs. Both are viable. If you need a little bit more savings, go with Goddard. If you can spend up for Ertz, I prefer Ertz over Goddard, but both are fine plays here. And then Logan Thomas, my favorite tight end play of the week, and I'd expect him to be pretty high owned as well. He's where you're going to go in cash games, but at only 3,700, going up against a Cleveland team who is getting killed by tight ends so far. They got murdered by Mark Andrews week 1, which Mark Andrews is a very good tight end, so I guess that's understandable. But then even CJ Uzomah had a good game versus them before he got hurt. And Sample had some catches that well. And Logan Thomas, he's getting some targets this season. He's got 8.5 targets per game, a 26% target share, 134 air yards, and a 7.9 ADOT, which is not bad at all for tight ends. And looking at what the Browns defense has done versus tight ends this season, allowing 21.1 DraftKings points per game, and their 30th DVA versus the pass, and allowing 2 receiving touchdowns per game. So Logan Thomas, he's in a pretty good spot here. Denzel Ward should be shadowing Terry McLaurin, and Denzel Ward's been just fine so far this season. So really the only way to go for the Washington football team is more than likely going to be Logan Thomas. So I think he's actually a really, really strong play. One of my favorite plays on the slate given the price tag. We'll move on to the defenses, which are pretty much hard to project, so you're pretty much just picking teams with low totals against them. The Colts are 11.5 point favorites at home versus the Jets, who looked awful so far, and they're going to be missing Brashad Perriman and Jamison Crowder, so I don't really think they're going to have much of an issue here, but they are super expensive, but it's a fine correlation play with Jonathan Taylor. The Bucs defense is pretty good so far. They're going up against Jeff Driscoll, only an 18-point implied team total against them. They're 5.5 point favorites. Chargers going up against Carolina without CMC. They're 6.5 point favorites at home here. Then the Eagles defense, which is probably going to be the chalk defense of the week, going up against Cincy. Look, Joe Burrow's fine, and it would not surprise me if the Eagles defense they get beat up a bit here, but they're cheap. They're 4.5 point favorites at home and only a 21 point implied team total against them. So I think they're certainly viable on defense. That's pretty much going to be it for the video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure to leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. Really helps me out. Really do appreciate that. And I'll see you guys in the next video.